In this chapter, I want to show you how to create freeze frames inside of Final Cut Pro. I have a timeline here already that I've put together, and you can see that my position indicator or playhead, whatever you'd like to call it, is queued up on this shot of Andy laying on his back on the ground. And he's got a really crazy look on his face. Let's say we wanted to take a still picture and use it in the timeline. It's very simple, actually. We have our shot queued up that we want with our playhead. If we come up here to Modify, we can choose Make Freeze Frame, where you can see the shortcut key here is Shift In. By choosing this, it will load this freeze frame here in my viewer, and you can see that it has a duration of 5 seconds. And here's a freeze frame. I'll just drag and drop it down here onto the timeline, back it up against this other shot, and if we play it, okay, there's our freeze frame. We can adjust the length of our freeze frame just by mousing over the edge and dragging it to any duration that we would like it to be because it's a still picture. We can also double click on this, and while it's loaded into the viewer, we can also specify how long we would like our freeze frame to last. For example, if we only wanted a 2-second freeze frame, we would just type 200 in this window and press the Enter key on the numeric keypad. Now this freeze frame is only worth 2 seconds. Now we can tell Final Cut Pro how long we would like our freeze frames to be before we create them. We can set this up in our preferences. To do that, let's go click on the name Final Cut Pro. Let's go to User Preferences. And if we click on the tab that says Editing, and let's zoom in and take a little closer look here, you can see it says Still Freeze Duration, and by default, that's worth 5 seconds. That window is already highlighted. For example, every time I create a freeze frame, if I want it to be worth 1 second, I would just type 100, press the Enter key on the numeric keypad. Now we have a 1 second duration in there. Let's click OK. Let's go to a different point on our timeline and create a freeze frame. Let's say we would like to create a freeze frame from that shot. Our position indicator is queued up. We go click on Modify. We can make freeze frame or Shift In. There's our freeze frame. And if we take a closer look at our time window, you can see that that freeze frame is worth 1 second. For example, if I'm an animator and I have a folder of numbered stills from a walk cycle, I may want to go in and tell Final Cut Pro in my user preferences under the editing tab that I want each freeze frame to say to be worth 1 frame each. For example, I can just type in 1 and press return. So if I'm an animator and I have created 30 frames per second of a walk cycle, I can tell Final Cut Pro when it imports those still frames to make them worth 1 frame each. Or if I'm doing 12 frames per second at a 24 frame time code, I make each still frame worth 2 frames each so that they play back smoothly. In this segment of the training video, I want to talk to you about mapping buttons or placing shortcuts to your buttons on the timeline. Inside of the Avid, those of you that are familiar with Avid, you're used to the command palette where you can place your shortcut buttons right on the timeline or sequence window. If we take a closer look here at our sequence window, you can see that we already have some shortcut buttons here. We have snapping, and we also have linked selection. It's very simple to add more shortcuts to our sequence or timeline window. If we come up top and we go to Tools, we have a button list. Once we open up our button list window, you can see that our buttons are organized by different operations inside of Final Cut Pro. So for example, if we were to choose the Modify window and we wanted to make a shortcut button for Make Freeze Frame, we just click and hold down on the button, and let's drag the button here on the timeline. Notice that it makes room, and now we have added a shortcut button to make a freeze frame. You can add as many shortcuts as you would like as long as they all fit. Let's go down and we'll choose another one. Here's speed. Click and hold down on the speed button, and let's add that to the timeline. Now if we want to get rid of a button, let's say that we've added one button too many, let's click and hold down on our speed button, and let's just drag it to the blue area or the background or desktop area, and if we let go, you'll see a little cloud puff. Watch this. Okay, so it's really simple to get rid of our buttons. Let's get rid of another button. Boom, little cloud puff. So to add it, we'll just click and add it back. And let's go back up here and get our freeze frame button. Click on Make Freeze Frame. And let's add that back to the timeline. Okay, so let's go ahead and use our button. Let's close our button list. Okay, we're queued up here where I would like to make a freeze frame. Let's select the canvas window and let's click on our Make Freeze Frame button. And there we go. You can see it made a freeze frame for us here in the viewer. And we can drag this still picture back down to the timeline. In this segment, I want to talk to you about the trimming window inside of Final Cut Pro. First, let's review this last media file that I placed here on the timeline. We can see the bunny is getting ready to choke Andy here. Then queued up already in the viewer, I have the shot where Andy gets choked on the close-up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is click and hold down on this media file, drag it over to the canvas window, drop it on overwrite. Let's click here and let's watch our edit. Okay, it's not too bad, but we could tighten this edit up a little bit by using the trimming window. If we double click here on the cut or the cut in between any two video files on the timeline, it will open up our trim edit window. The window here on the left contains the media file that's on the left of the cut, and the media file that's in the right of the trim window is the media file that's on the right of the cut. Let's change the out point of the media file that's here in the left of the trim window. Let's click on the playhead and just drag it. And let's cue the playhead right here where actually the bunny has a hold of Andy's neck. And let's click on this button here to select a new out point for that media file. I don't know if you noticed, but the file's updated down here on the timeline. Now let's come over here to the right-hand side of the trim window. And let's grab our little playhead, and we can re-cue this playhead. And right in there, I think, is where I'd like my new endpoint to be. So I'm going to click on the Mark In button. I don't know if you noticed, but down here on the timeline, the media file's updated for our new out and in points. Let's click anywhere here on the timeline above to take us out of trim mode. Let's press the L key and play back and watch this edit. Watch it again. And one more time. And it's not too bad, but we could tighten this trim up by a few more frames to get back into trim mode. Let's just double click on the cut. It opens up our trim window. Let's take a closer look here at the trim window. Down here at the bottom of the trim window, we have these quick shortcut buttons here to trim back -1 frame or -5 frames on the left of the cut, or notice on the right of the cut we have +5 and +1. Okay, let's zoom back out a little bit and let's take a look at our trim window here, and I think that I'm actually going to advance this +1 frame. And let's do it one more. Okay, I don't know if you've been watching the timeline, but it's updating on the timeline while I press this button. Let's try this edit. Let's click to get out of the trim window mode, and let's press the L key and take a look at our edit. Okay, there we go. I like that edit. That's using the trim window inside of Final Cut Pro. Okay, in this segment I want to talk to you about the slip tool. We come over here to our tools menu. When we click and hold down, you can see that we have other tool selections that we can make. We first want to talk about the slip tool, the first one, or the shortcut is S. We come up here to this media file and click and hold down. Let me show you what the slip tool does. The slip tool allows us to move the in and out points without changing the duration or position of the media file on the timeline. We click and hold down, there's a very long rectangular marquee line kind of highlight showing us how much footage we have to slip our edit. Where this media file is now, we can see the bunny's head is sticking out of the bush. If we click and hold down with the slip tool, we're looking at the monitor on the left. When we click and hold down, notice it goes into the dual windows there in the canvas. Look here in the canvas window. Click and hold down the slip edit tool. You can see it goes into split mode. The bunny head is sticking out. That is our endpoint, and the window on the right shows us our out point. So right now we're going to click and hold down, and if we drag, you can see how the in and out points update. So notice how it jumps about 5 frames every time we move it with the mouse. So we're going to have to zoom in Apple Plus to zoom in on our timeline. That gives us a tighter view. Now when we drag this, we can drag it 1 frame at a time. The media file is not changing position or length on the timeline, but the in and out points are changing when we hold down the mouse and drag the slip edit tool back and forth. Okay, there's the bunny head. That's the end point. Let's take a look. The key thing is that the slip tool changes the in and out points at the same time. So when we move the in, we move the out point. We click and hold down on our tool menu here. You can see if we hold down, our first tool was the slip. Now let's go use the slide tool or shortcut key SS. The slide tool is pretty simple. It works like this. The slide tool enables us to move a media file on the timeline. And if we move it to the left, it changes the duration of the clip on the left and the right. For example, let's grab a different media file and just put it on the end of this clip here. Okay, so we will get our slide tool. Let's grab this file. Notice how I can slide that file down. And it gives the clip on the left more duration and the clip on the right less duration or less time, but it does not change the length of the timeline. This is very useful for many reasons. We have a long show, and you don't want to mess up your timeline, and you've got extra good footage on either end of the media files attached to the media file that you're using the slip tool on. It's handy just to grab the slip tool and change the edit. In this segment, I'm going to show you how to work with composite modes. Those of you that have been using Photoshop and After Effects for a while have probably been using transfer modes for a while. The composite modes and the transfer modes are pretty much the same thing. We can get to the composite modes a couple of ways. We click on Modify. While a media file is selected, we can go and choose our composite mode off of this menu. Okay, to demonstrate the composite modes, I'm going to duplicate this video clip on top of itself, and then I'm going to make sure that this file is selected, and I'm going to go to Modify, Composite Mode, and I'm going to choose Multiply for my first composite mode. And you can see how dark it made the image over here, but it gives it kind of a really contrasty look and really brings out the sky. If we go back to Modify, Composite Mode, here's Overlay. There's what Overlay looks like. It brings out the bunny a little bit, but it blows out the clouds. Notice the zebra stripes. What's even more interesting is if I place this video clip over top of a different clip, they'll kind of bleed together. Let's change the composite mode of the bunny clip. Let's choose Subtract. So there's Subtract. Let's use Option P to force this to play. Okay, there's one kind of effect that you can get using the composite mode. Let's try a different one. Let's try Overlay. There's Overlay. Let's go back, choose Option P. Okay, so there's Overlay composite mode, two different video clips over top of each other. Well, let's try one more. Composite mode. Let's choose the Travel Matte Luma and see what happens. Okay, so there's Travel Matte Luma composite mode. I've already created a title here in my viewer so that we can work with some composite modes on this title. I'm going to click and hold down on my title, and I'm going to drag and drop it on Superimpose this time, and it will make it the exact duration of the clip beneath it and place it on the video track above. I'm going to select this title, and I'm going to go to Modify, Composite Mode, and if you want to make video play inside of the font, for example, we can choose Travel Matte Luma, and it flips our image and makes it play inside of the font. If I hold down Option and press P, it will force play back the video clip inside of our text. So that's how the composite mode can work with text. In this segment, I want to show you how to make a key inside of Final Cut Pro. Let's double click on this media file here. Here's a shot of the anchor over the green screen, and we want to key the anchor over top of the media file here on video track 1. It's really simple. Let's just put our playhead here in the middle, like I told you before, right in the center of this media file. Let's click and hold down on this media file here in the viewer. Let's drag over here to the canvas. Let's choose Superimpose. You can see that the media file is now superimposed over top of this file. We can't see the file beneath it yet. That's because we need to place an effect on here. Let's take a closer look here. Let's click on our Effects tab. And if we go choose Key and collapse this window here, we have an effect here called Chroma Keyer. It's really simple. Let's just drag and drop Chroma Keyer. right here on the media file on the timeline, let go. And if we come over here to the canvas window, you can see that the Chroma Keyer does a pretty good job of knocking out all of the green. We need to work on this shot just a little bit more. What we're going to do is we're going to come over here and double click on the media file to make sure that it's loaded inside the viewer. And if we go click on the Chroma Keyer tab, we can adjust our chroma key. For example, we could open up the range of colors that it selects. You can see that it knocked out more of the background. However, we still have an edge here, a little green edge around the anchor. If we come down here, we can actually soften the edge a little bit. But if we soften it too much, you can see that it makes like a green halo. We can trim the halo by using edge thin. Trim some of the halo back, but you can see that it eats into the anchor a little bit. So let's take our softening back to bring back some of the detail around the edge. Let's go up here and turn off the image and wireframe. And now let's scrub through this media file to get an idea of how our new key looks here. Okay, not bad. So that's the Chroma Keyer inside of Final Cut. In this Final Cut segment, I'm going to show you how to use a Luminance Key filter. We have a video clip here that I'm going to drag and just put it on video track 1. And also have another clip here that I've created in LiveType that will represent the element that we're going to use for our Luminance Key. I've created this element in LiveType. It's some white squares with some magenta over black. Okay, pretty cool little graphic here. Drag and drop this little clip here over top on video track 2. Notice how I placed it above on video track 2. I'm going to click on my effects tab and let's go get a Luminance Key. Inside of this folder right here under filters it says key. Click on the twirler and let's scroll down and let's get Luma Key. We're going to drag and drop Luma Key right here on the clip on V2. Notice by default that the Luma Key is set to replace white with the background video. To adjust the Luma Key filter, let's double click on the clip here on video 2 and it loads it inside of the viewer. If we zoom in and take a closer look at the viewer, let's click on our filters tab and you can see the controls here for our Luma Key. We can view the final, which is what we want to see, and the key mode right now is to key out brighter. So let's switch it if we want to key out darker. Now you can look at the image over here and see that the white block is over top and the black is being replaced by the video beneath. If we switch this, if we say key out brighter, it'll go back to what we had before where white is filled in by the video clip underneath. It's very important to understand that the video underneath the clip is what's going to fill in the white or the black for the Luminance Key. You can see that we also have other adjustments here, our threshold and tolerance. We'll adjust the threshold. So you can see as I move the threshold to the right that we lose the video, and moving it to the left actually makes the video come in a little bit sharper and uses up more of the square. You can adjust these to the visual look that you're going for. Just play with them. That's how you're going to learn how to use this stuff. Just by diving in here and messing with these controls, trust me, that's the best way to learn. So we can turn off the little check mark here. So there's the before and the after. If we want to get rid of the Luma Key completely, let's just click on it and press delete and it's gone. So once again, just drag and drop the Luma Key filter on the clip above, double click on it to load it inside the viewer, click on filters, and then you can adjust here inside of the filters tab. We'll leave it on key out brighter, and let's bring back our threshold a little bit. Now if we come down here and we click above or press our home key to go to the beginning of the sequence, remember Option P will force Final Cut to play back. It won't be at a full frame rate. At least you'll get an idea of what your effect looks like. Now that I've shown you how to do a Luminance Key, I'm going to show you some other tricks to give you some more ideas to create with Final Cut. So I'm going to make sure that I have this Luminance Key clip here selected that's on V2, and I want to come over here to the canvas window. Let's take a closer look. We click on this little drop down widget. We want to choose image and wireframe so that it turns on the wireframe for that particular layer or clip. And then what I want to do is actually click here and I want to zoom out to about 25%. Then I'm going to hold down my shift key and grab the corner of this element that we've turned on the wireframe for. I'm actually going to compress it. Holding down shift in Final Cut works backwards of, say, Photoshop when you're scaling. So I'm going to scale this element down, and then by holding Shift and dragging this element, it will keep it in a straight line. I'm going to put it down here like so. Then I'm going to come back up to this widget, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to go to Show Title Safe. Okay, let's go back to our size. Let's take it up to Fit to Window. Now what we're going to do is come over here to the viewer. We're going to click on our Video tab. And down here at the bottom right-hand corner of the viewer, we're going to click on this little A, this little drop down, and we're going to create a lower third. You can see there's the last thing that I went to, which was a lower third, but let's go ahead and go down into the menu, and let me show you lower third. Okay, so now we have a basic lower third that we have created. Now let's click on Controls, and what we want to do is actually scroll down, and down here where it says Background, let's choose a bar, and we can adjust the opacity of this bar. Now we'll zoom out. What we're going to do now is move our patch. Let's move our source patch. What we want to do is actually superimpose our text up here on V3 and make it the same length as this media file here. I'll show you, it's really easy. Come up here, let's click on the Video tab. I'm going to click and hold down on this image and drag it over to the canvas window, and let's choose Superimpose. Watch what happens. See that how it placed the lower third right here on video track 3. Once again, that's because I placed my patch or my source on V2. So you can see the lower third is superimposed over top of that graphical element. For whatever reason, it didn't really make that bar the way I thought it was going to. That's okay. Let's edit this. Let's double click on it. Let's go back. Let's click on Controls. And if we scroll down right here for background, instead of the bar, let's choose solid. We'll go ahead and leave our opacity at around 53, 52%. Let's zoom back out. And let's come over here and turn off our wireframe. Let's go from wireframe just to image. There we go. Now I'm going to bring this back to the beginning. Let's hold down Option and press P. Okay, almost. So there's a little bit fancier of a lower third title, but we need to work on this some more. We need to soften that little light effect. Let's go back to our Effects tab. Let's come up here to the Blur folder. Okay, let's collapse the blur. Let's drop the Gaussian blur onto the Luma key clip on video track 2. And let's double click on that. Now we're going to click on the Filters tab, and let's take a closer look at the parameters for our Gaussian blur. Let's crank our radius up to about 23, and we can see that this is softened up quite a bit. Let's press Option P. Now you can take a look at the little fancy title that we've made here using a Luminance key and the lower third text tool inside of Final Cut. Okay, we're ready to talk about color correction and using effects with Final Cut Pro. I have a shot of Andy queued up here in the canvas window, and I've also double clicked on it to load it here in the viewer. The next thing I want to do is click on my Effects tab. If I come over here to Video Filters, there's a folder titled Color Correction. I want to choose Color Corrector 3-Way. I'm going to zoom into this window a little bit so you can see it. I don't know if you notice or not, but that font is in bold. That indicates that this is a real-time effect inside of Final Cut Pro. We want to use the Color Corrector 3-Way. We're just going to drag and drop this on Andy's clip here in the viewer. We could also drag and drop it on the clip that's on the timeline and just double click on it and reload it in the viewer. We have a tab here now that says Color Corrector 3-Way. If we click on this tab, you can see our color corrector. Now I'm going to show you a little trick. If we click and hold down on this tab and we come down into the timeline, we can dock the color corrector onto the timeline so that we have more space to use our color corrector. Okay, so here's our shot of Andy. The next thing we want to do is select the canvas, and if we go to Tools, we want to go to our frame viewer. Okay, the frame viewer is going to show us a before and after. Let's talk about the color corrector. Here's my blacks, my mids, and my whites. So for example, this little slider here adjusts the darkness and the brightness of the picture in regards to the black levels. There are mids, and here are the whites. Before we make this adjustment, we want to be very cautious of our levels. Let's turn on what's called range check so that we can see if our broadcast whites and chroma are safe. I'm going to click on the canvas window, and I want to go choose view. Let's come down here to range check. Under range check, I want to choose both. I want to see excess Luma and excess Chroma. Okay, so we can see here on Andy's shoulder that we're getting some zebra patterns, that our levels are a little bit hot. All right. So if we come back down here to the color corrector, if we pull these whites back down to where they were originally, when we come back, you can see that we have a green check mark and that we're okay there on the shoulder. Now, it's hard sometimes to get your levels perfect. You may have to sacrifice a couple hot spots to get the rest of the image perfect. Color correction is a career within itself. A lot of people specialize in color, and that's all that they do. You can't do color correction by committee. It has to be one person that does color correction on your projects, and it's in charge of color. Like I said, color correction by committee does not work. Everyone sees color a little bit different. I can make large adjustments to my color corrector by holding down the Apple key. It lets me move it much further than if I just clicked on it without the Apple key. I'm having to move my mouse a really far distance on the mouse pad to make it do anything. Okay, let's talk about some really quick ways to adjust your video clip inside the color corrector. If we zoom in here a little bit, if we mouse over these, you can see we have auto black level. By clicking on this button here, it will do the auto black level. Here's the after and here's the before. Let's come back down. Here is auto contrast. We'll click on auto contrast. Not much different. This clip was already color corrected pretty well. Last but not least, here's an auto white. Let's see what auto white has done for us. Not much again. Here's our saturation. If we crank this all the way up, we come up here to the middle, you can see the difference. Here is our after and our before. Here's a different look for color correction. You could put the frame viewer in the middle, canvas windows over here on the right, so you can see the timeline. Then here's our color corrector. We've just taken the viewer and actually just pushed it over here. So it's kind of hiding the browser window right now. If you had like a 23-inch cinema display, you could probably see all the windows at once. Okay, so let's check out some of our tools over here on the color corrector. We have auto black level. We want to focus our attention over here in the frame view when we click on these. So we'll choose auto black level. Didn't see much of a difference. Here's auto contrast. I saw a little bit of a difference there. And I don't know if you noticed, but we have our green check mark now. I guess our levels were a little bit hot. If we undo that, Apple Z, this changes to the explanation point. We'll zoom in a little bit. You can see here on the sky that our levels are a little bit hot. We've got some zebras going on there. So we'll zoom back out. So auto contrast kind of hooked us up there and took care of the sky being a little blown out. So there's our green check mark indicating that our levels are safe. Let's go here and choose auto white and see if we see a difference. Not much. So there's the new and improved, and over here is the old. Can't really tell a lot of difference, but if we zoom into this, you might be able to see the line there. If we adjust our saturation, if we crank that up, you can clearly see a difference here on the before and after. If we zoom in a little bit on this, here's the new and improved, and over here is before. Let's definitely take that saturation back down. We could tint our whites if we wanted to try to make the sky a little bit bluer. I'm going to hold down the Apple key. I'm going to move the whites into the blue, just give it a little bit more blue there. So that's pretty much the basics of the color corrector. Okay, I want to talk to you about using the color corrector to fix photos that you're going to use in your video and film projects. I'm going to double click on this photo that I've imported into my browser, and it will load it here inside the viewer. Now what I'm going to do is click on the little red overwrite here on the canvas window or press F10 on the keyboard, your choice. Brings it down to video track 1 on the timeline, remember, because we're patched to V1. Now what I want to do is click on my Effects tab. Let's click on Effects, and then what we want to do is collapse the twirler for video filters, collapse the twirler for color correction, and now let's choose Color Corrector 3-way. What I'm going to do is click and hold down on that and drop it on the media file on V1, and then we'll double click on the file to load it inside the viewer. Now let's click on the color correction tab. There we go. We're ready to do some color correcting now. This image is a little bit cool, so we might want to warm it up a bit. In the highlights, or the whites, I can see that it has some blue. I'm going to hold down the Apple key and I'm going to drag the little dot towards the R mark. There we go. We're starting to warm it up a little bit. We're starting to get some flesh tones back. Let's look here at our midtones. Our mids are also a little cool. Let's warm this up a bit. Now you can see we're starting to get some flesh tone through here on their faces again. If we come up here to the eyeball where the check mark is, this is where we can turn on and off the color corrector to see our before and after. Let's turn it off. Okay, so there is before. You can see how cool the image is. And there is after. We've warmed it up. Okay, I want to show you how to use the color corrector to create special effects inside of Final Cut. Check out this clip here of Brock Mellows that we've queued up inside the viewer. I've already dropped it here on V1 on the timeline. What I want to do is make Brock Mellows a green man from Mars, and we can do that with the color corrector inside of Final Cut. Inside the browser window, let's click on the Effects tab. Then let's click on the twirler for Video Filters, and then we want to go down to Color Correction, and let's choose the Color Corrector 3-way, and we're going to drag and drop this Color Corrector 3-way onto our media file here on Video Track 1. Now let's double click on the file on Video Track 1 and load it inside of the viewer. Then up top here, let's click on this tab that says Color Corrector 3-way. Here's our color corrector. What we want to do is focus down here on the bottom left of the color corrector, and let's collapse this little twirler, this little hidden triangle here where it says Limit Effect, and it will reveal our Limit Effect controls. Now what we want to do is come over here where this dropper is, and let's just come over here on his flesh tone somewhere on his face, and let's just click and take a sample. What we want to do next is click right here on this key because it will reveal what selection has been made. Okay, so you can see that's what we've got so far. And I'm going to go ahead and click on this key twice to turn it off. Selected area. If we click on it once, it reveals the selected area. And let's click on it twice to turn it off. Now what we want to do is in this etched area of the color corrector, I'm going to click on that etched area and I'm going to hold down. I'm going to stretch out my color corrector and make it a little bit bigger so that I can see what's going on here with my blacks, my mids, and my whites. So I'll tell you what, let's hold down the Apple key and let's grab our mids and let's bring it to the green mark. Okay, we see his face starting to turn green, and that reveals what we have selected so far. Let's go back down here and click on the dropper, and let's hold down the Shift key this time before we drop. See that little plus sign that's appearing next to the dropper as I hold down Shift? Okay, I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to add to the selection. I'm going to come back and get the dropper, hold down the plus key again, and let's add more to the selection. And we're going to do this several times until we grab most of his skin here on his face. Hold down Shift. Okay, let's go back and get it again. Dropper, hold down Shift. Okay, we'll do it a few more times to try to grab as much as we can. Holding down Shift before we click. Dropper, holding down Shift. And let's come back down here. We're missing some of the neck. There we go. All right, so we don't have all of it selected, but we're doing pretty good so far. Let me show you some other tools that we have down here to work with. Down here where it says softening, if we move our softening a little bit to the right, you can see that it starts to smooth out that color and fill it in the rest of his face. Let's go ahead and zoom back out, and let's play with softening a little bit more. If we pull it all the way to the right, to the extreme, you can see that it's actually filled his face out pretty well, but it's starting to bleed out through here with a little bit of that green. Let's go ahead and click down here in the timeline, and let's hold down Option P. Let's take a look and see what we have. Okay, so he's starting to look like a green man from Mars, but we need to work on this a little bit more. We can see on the ear here that it's still not really a solid green, and we have this green halo coming out. So let's go back and let's pull our softening back to the middle. Now let's click on our key again so we can see what we have selected. Well, it's got his face, but it's also got some area out here. So we're going to have to be careful and make sure we don't grab too much of the bricks. We also have edge thin that we can mess with. Let's take edge thin back to the left. You can see now there's not very much green, so if we move edge thin back to the right, if we go all the way to the right, we'll actually color more of the image green than we want. So we kind of have to find a happy medium here. All right, somewhere in there. Let's get our dropper and hold down the plus key. Let's try to get this area of his forehead. Let's do it again. Okay, it's a little bit better. We can also adjust the highlights. Let's hold down the Apple key. There's some green highlights, and we can also make the blacks a little bit more green. We want to watch our broadcast safe levels. Let's click on the canvas window. Let's go to View, Range Check, and Show Both. Okay, we still have a green check mark, so that means we're good to go. We're not overexposed here. Let's take back that softening a little bit. You can see that we've got the concrete in between the bricks selected. Actually pulling softening towards the middle kind of fakes out that a little bit, but we've got too much green through here. So let's bring back our Luma a little bit. So if we come back too far, though, we start to lose the selection. There we go. By pulling this Luma in on the right here, notice that we don't have the bricks selected as much. And let's adjust our softening a little bit more. All right, let's check out this image. Option P. All right, he's starting to look like a green man from Mars. All right, there you go. So there's your green man from Mars with the color corrector tool. Okay, let's do another special effect with the color corrector tool. I have a Volkswagen photograph here with a fisheye lens. Let's play with changing the color of our car. Let's go back, let's click on the Effects tab, Video Filters, Color Correction. Let's get the color corrector three-way again. Let's drag and drop it on the clip here on V1. We'll double click on it to load it inside the viewer. And let's click on Color Correction tab. You know the deal. Let's collapse the little twirler here at the bottom of the color corrector so that we can see everything. Okay, now that we have our color corrector open inside the viewer, what I want to do is focus down here in the bottom right-hand corner of the viewer. See this etched area? I want to click and hold down on the etched area. I want to stretch out my color corrector so that I can see all of my controls. All right, the next thing that I want to do is come over here and get my dropper, and let's select a color on the Volkswagen itself. There we go. We just took a sample of the color. Now let's hold down the Apple key. Let's go to this circle here inside the mids window, and let's drag it to green so that we can actually see what we have selected. You can see the dropper took a little sample of the color there. We need to add more to this selection. Let's come back and click on the dropper. Let's hold down the Shift key and let's make another selection here on the Volkswagen. Okay, we got a little bit more. Grab the dropper, hold down the Shift key. I don't know how well you can see this, but if you hold down the Shift key, see the little plus sign there? We talked about it earlier. Okay, I'm going to keep adding to this selection. Dropper, Shift key. Okay, so now what we want to do is take our softening to about here, and let's take our edge thin to right around here. Now we want to expand the envelope of the luminance a little bit, so let's take it down to the left. Okay, you can see we picked up some image here. And let's move up the luminance, and let's open up our saturation a little bit more. Okay, so we're starting to grab some more of the color here. Now let's go work with our whites. Let's pull it to the green mark, and let's pull our blacks in a little bit. We have changed the color of the Volkswagen to green. All right, let's cycle through this. Let's hold down Apple, let's go to the mids, and let's grab this green dot, and let's make the car purple. Go over here to our whites. Let's move this towards magenta. Let's be careful because notice we're getting flagged here with the exclamation point, meaning that our levels are too hot. We also have some zebras that are happening here. On some of the hot spots, it's going to be a little hard to avoid. Also notice where we're softening the image that we're glowing out into the windshield and off the car a little bit. Let's come down here. Let's move softening back a little bit. Let's take edge thin down a little bit. Okay, there we go. It's not as bad. Okay, so that's how you can change the color of a car with a color corrector. Okay, I want to talk to you about importing photos, and then we're going to animate those photos together. Here in my browser, I don't have any bins created. I recommend that the first thing you do is create a bin. We're going to right-click and choose New Bin. Here's our bin, and let's name this bin. We're going to call it Photos. Now we're going to double-click on our bin to open up our bin window. See, there's our tab. And then we're going to come up here to File. And we're going to go down to Import Files. And you can see that I have a folder here that's called Park 2, and I would like to import some photos from this folder. Here's the first photo that I want to grab. If I want to grab multiple photos, I can hold down the Shift key and Shift select, say, those 4 photos there. I'll click on Choose. And once I do that, it imports those 4 photos inside of my bin. By double-clicking on the photo, we can load it here in the viewer. If we take a closer look, you can see that the default duration of this photo is 1 second. That's because we told our preferences to make every photo that we import to be worth 1 second. So for example, if we want to do a photo move or photo animations, and we know how long we would like each of our photos to be, we might want to change our preferences before we import our photos. Let's come over here to the name Final Cut Pro. Let's go to User Preferences. And if we click on the Editing tab, you can see that the still freeze duration is 1 second. That's already highlighted. And I would actually like each photo to be worth 5 seconds each. So I'm going to type 500 and press Enter. Then we'll come down here and click OK. Now the photos that I have already imported are going to stay at a duration of 1 second each. So I can manually change them by double-clicking here in this time code and typing 500. And then it will change the duration to 5 seconds. But if I've imported, say, 10, 30 photos, it's going to be a pain in the butt to go manually change the duration for every one of those photos. So I recommend that if you messed up and didn't set your still duration time, that we actually come in here, let's just highlight these photos, let's press delete to delete them out of our bin. Let's zoom back out for a second and let's re-import these photos now, and they will all have a duration of 5 seconds. We go back to import files. It remembers where we were last. Let's scroll down to the bottom. I'm going to select that photo. I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and let's grab those 4 or 5 photos there. I'll click Choose. And if we take a closer look here, you can see that each one of these photos are now worth 5 seconds each. Let's come back out. Now, by double-clicking on one of the photos, it will load it here in my viewer. If I double-click on the file, loads it in my viewer. And if we come in and take a closer look, you can see that the time code is 5 seconds. Now, just like video clips, if I want to bring this down to the timeline, I can click and hold down, bring it over to the canvas window, and choose Overwrite, and it drops my photo on the timeline. So here's our first photo. Let's go find a different photo. We'll double-click on this next photo. Loads a photo here in my viewer. We click and hold down. Let's drag it on Overwrite. Drops it on our timeline. Let's back up. If we play, you can see the 2 photos make a cut. So the first thing that we might want to do is add a dissolve between these 2 photos. I showed you in an earlier chapter how to use transitions, but if you don't recall, we take a closer look by right-clicking on the cut. You can add a transition. This Add Transition Ripple Dissolve. We'll click on that. Adds the Ripple Dissolve transition. Notice this is not a real-time transition. It's in red. But if we click past this, remember the shortcut key that I told you about earlier? If we hold down Option and press P, it will force Final Cut Pro to play back this transition or effect anyway. It won't play it back at 30 frames a second, but you get the idea of what the transition will look like. Now, I don't really want to use a ripple dissolve there. I'm going to click on that and delete that. And if we come over here to the browser and we click on the Effects tab, we go to Video Transitions, Dissolve. I actually want to change my dissolve to the default transition. You can see that Ripple Dissolve is underlined. By right-clicking on Cross Dissolve, we can set this as the default transition. See how it's underlined now? Let's zoom back out. Let's come down here to the cut. And if we right-click, we'll add Transition Cross Dissolve. If we play this back, you can see that it's green, and this is a real-time transition. There we go. We did a little photo fade. Take a look at it one more time. Now, if we wanted to do a little move on these photos, for example, if we wanted to start out close on the cloud and slowly zoom out of the cloud while we're fading into the next photo, this is very simple. We'll double-click on the first photograph that's sitting on our timeline, and let's load it back into the viewer. If we click on our Motion tab, this takes us to the window where we can adjust the scale of the image. Let's take a closer look. You can see that our scale right now is at 48%. If we click in here and type 100 and press the Enter key on the numeric keypad, we can change the scale of our photo back to 100%. Let's zoom back out. And if we click above the clip on the timeline, you can see how tight we are on our cloud. So we want to animate this with keyframes, and we're going to do the same trick that we did before using the Video Filters tab. If we click and hold down on the Motion tab, we can break that off and put it on the timeline. And we can now add some keyframes here. So for scale, let's add a keyframe for 100%. Let's move our playhead into the media file, and let's change our scale to 50%. You can see it gets smaller, but we don't want to reveal any of the black area. So we may not want to go down that far. Let's try 55, return. There we go. So if we back up our playhead, we'll play this. You can see that the photo does a really slow zoom out. Let's redock the Motion tab up here on the viewer. Reveals our timeline. Let's back this up and play it. Okay, now the photo actually stopped before we reached our dissolve. So we want to make sure that that photo is still moving when we go into the dissolve on the other shot. Let's double click on the file, reload it into the viewer. Let's go to the Motion tab and let's drag and let's redock that to the timeline. And we actually want to grab this last keyframe here and let's pull it to where it's off the screen. So once again, this file is still moving as it approaches the dissolve. That might be a little too much. We don't want to shrink it down that far. So I can just bring that up a little bit. Down like so. Like I said, we don't want to go outside the safe area with our photo. Let's redock Motion back up here to the viewer, and let's take a look at our photo zoom. Okay, once again, play it back. Okay, so that's the motion move on the first photo. By double clicking on the second photo, let's load that into the viewer. Let's come up here and let's break off our Motion tab and let's place that on the timeline. And the same deal, we can make keyframes for this shot. Let's actually increase our scale. Let's go to 80%. Let's lay a keyframe. Remember, we want this shot to already be moving when we come into it. So let's move that keyframe off the screen. And we'll come here. Let's type 55, return. We've added a second keyframe. Let's drag our Motion tab back up here to the viewer. And let's play back our edit. Okay, so you can see that we're zooming out of the cloud, and now we come into the other shot and we're zooming out too. Now we might want to flip those keyframes and go the other way. We may actually want to be zooming into this shot instead of pulling out. We'll undock the Motion tab, let's drop it on the timeline, and let's make our first keyframe a value of 55. And we can use this little arrow here. By clicking on this arrow, it will jump to the next keyframe, and let's change this to a value of 100%. Let's redock the Motion tab up here on the viewer. Now let's take a look at our photo move. Okay, so to adjust the speed of those moves, you might want to spread the keyframes out further apart so the image moves slower, or you can move your keyframes closer together to make your photos move faster. That concludes this chapter on doing photo moves inside of Final Cut Pro. Okay, in this segment I want to show everyone how to create a picture and a picture effect. We have a computer monitor here on our timeline already on video track 1. Notice that the target is on video track 1. Our source is on the destination. If we come over here and we drag and drop this media file that I have queued up here in the viewer called Bunnyfoot, and we choose Superimpose, it will make the exact same length of the clip on video track 2. See how I placed it right above? Let's undo that and do that again. Click and hold down on Bunnyfoot, come over to the canvas, choose Superimpose, let go of the mouse button, places the clip right above our media file. Now what we want to do is select this file, and then if we come over here to the canvas window, let's take a closer look. What we want to do is click on this little drop-down menu, and we want to choose Image and Wireframe so that we can adjust the position of this media file. If we double-click on this media file to make sure that's loaded in the viewer, we click on the Motion tab, and we want to go down to where it says Crop. Let's collapse the Crop Twirler, and we want to crop off this white edge that's around this media file. Let's trim off the bottom. Take some off the top, off the right, and off the left-hand side. Now the next thing we want to do is collapse the twirler for basic motion, and we want to adjust our scale. Let's type in 79. Press return. Okay, we're almost there. Now this is why we turned on the image and wireframe, because now we can move this image and adjust it. If our image and wireframe were turned off, I would not be able to adjust the image. For example, I'll turn it off for a second. You can see now I can't grab it. So let's go back and turn back on image and wireframe. Now I can position this a little bit better here in our monitor. Might want to take our right-hand side off just a little bit. See how we can line it up with the computer monitor edge there. Let's trim some of the left. Okay, now let's feather it to soften the edge a little bit. Okay, now if we click off of the media file, notice how it's selected. Let's click in the gray background. We can see the media file is not selected. Alright, it's almost convincing, but we have too much of an edge here around. So let's take care of that. Let's select the media file, and let's take down our edge feather. It might be a little too much edge feather. We might want to bring our scale up a little bit. Let's type in 80. Let's reposition our image. Click in the gray background. Okay, looks pretty good to me. Okay, so that's how you can do a picture-in-a-picture effect with Final Cut. In this segment, I want to talk to you about the user preferences inside of Final Cut. If we click on the name Final Cut and we go down and choose a User Preferences, it will open up our User Preferences window. In this window, we can make specifications about our project. For example, we have levels of undo. I might want more levels of undo than 10. I think that you can have up to 99. Let's put 99 in there. Real-time audio mixing. For example, if your computer starts to slow down on audio playback, you might want to reduce the amount of real-time mixing tracks, say from 8 to 4, especially if you're working on a laptop, such as a PowerBook. And then the audio playback quality, depending on how fast your computer is, you might want to leave it on lower, or we can put ours on medium. And this is something else that's very important, is auto-save. For example, if you want your project to save every 30 minutes, in our case, we might want our project to save every 5 minutes. Now it keeps backup copies in the autosave vault, kind of like the Avid Addict. It's very similar, so that you can get to your project if you bag your first one. If we come over to this side, you can see that we have some other settings. Each time we start Final Cut Pro, we can prompt it to start a new project, for example, by checking this box. And we can also make Final Cut Pro report dropped frames during playback. If you know that you have a slow hard drive and you're going to be dropping frames during playback, you might want to uncheck this box so it doesn't bug you constantly. Here's something that's really important. On timecode break, make a new clip. This is really good, especially if you're digitizing. And then down here is the auto render, which means if you leave your timeline sitting for 45 minutes, the computer will start to automatically render your timeline, a nice feature. We come up here and we click on the editing tab. You can see this is where we can set our still and freeze frame duration. We can also set the pre-roll for our deck or camera. And over here we can turn on dynamic trimming. And you can see all the other settings that we have in here. Let's click on labels. This is a pretty good little tool to use where you can label your shots. We also have timeline options where you can set the starting time code. For example, your first tape would be 01, second tape would be 02, third tape would be 03 hours. Of course, we're using drop frame time code because we're working with mini DV. You can also set the default track size, the thumbnail size. Here's something else that's very important, is our track display. For example, if you want to see the keyframe overlays, you can turn on the keyframe overlays. If you want to see audio waveforms, we can also check that and turn that on. Here's our render control and the audio output. Okay, so this is the user preference window. You might want to take a closer look at this window and your manual to decide which settings are best for you. Once you plug in all of your settings, click on OK, and then your user preferences will take place. Sometimes you may have to create a new sequence or restart Final Cut so that all of your preferences will take effect. Okay, in this segment I want to show you the Voiceover Tool inside of Final Cut Pro. I've moved my position indicator back here to the beginning. I can either drag it or use the Home key. And what I would like to do is lay down a voiceover here on audio track 3. It's very simple. If we just go to Tools, let's choose the Voiceover Tool or Option 0, and it opens up our Voiceover Tool. Let's take a closer look at the Voiceover Tool. The Voiceover Tool is a really neat tool, especially if you're traveling with your PowerBook on an airplane or at the airport or on the bus, whatever, and you need to lay in a voiceover. We can use the built-in microphone that's inside of the PowerBook. You can see that it's responding to my voice already. You can see that the source is built-in audio and that our input is the internal microphone inside of the PowerBook. The target right now is channel A3 or track A3. If we come down here and take a look, you can see that if we move this target down here to A3, and all we need to do is just click record, and we're going to actually hear the audio of our timeline also. So it's really important that we mix that audio properly, so if it's too loud it might distract us while we're laying our voiceover. Okay, I'm just going to click on the record button. You can hear the beeps. And we're recording now.
Hey, that's my briefcase.
So we're watching the bunny take the briefcase from Andy. Check test 1, 2, blah, 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 blah. This is your voiceover that's now being recorded on A3. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to stop recording. Okay, so you can see down here on A3 that we've laid in our voiceover. I'm just going to close out the voiceover tool. And let's back up and take a listen. So we're watching the bunny take the briefcase from Andy. Check test 1, 2, blah, 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 blah. This is your voiceover that's now being recorded on A3. Okay, you can hear how hollow, however, my audio is from the internal PowerBook microphone. I am actually too far from that microphone, but it's really good to just use it as a sample voiceover. I'm not saying that this replaces going into a voiceover booth. It's just a way that you can lay down your thoughts on the timeline when you're in a pinch. Now you could, like I said, hook up your FireWire-based camera and then use the XLR input and a lavalier microphone that way to lay in your voiceover. So that's the voiceover tool inside of Final Cut. In this segment, I want to talk to you about converting MP3 audio files to AIFF. MP3s do not work well inside of Final Cut or most non-linear editing programs. To convert our MP3 file to AIFF really easy without having to open an application, let's just right-click or control-click on the MP3 file. Let's choose Open with QuickTime Player. And it opens our MP3 inside of the QuickTime Player. Now let's just go choose File, Export. And once it opens our export window, we want to export this to AIFF. Now if we click on Options, we probably want to go ahead and choose 48K 16-bit stereo, and we don't want any compression at all. No compression. Click OK. Notice how it puts the AIFF extension on the end of the file. And then if you click the little drop-down blue arrow there, we can choose which hard drive we would like to put our AIFF file on. Okay, and then we just click on Save, and QuickTime Pro converts our MP3 to an AIFF file. Here is our AIFF file, and let's just play it right here in the column view of the Finder. Okay, I think you get the idea. So that's converting MP3s to AIFF files very quickly using QuickTime Pro. In this segment, we're going to get a little bit more in detail with LiveType. Here in our text entry window, I'm going to type "like a pro." Now I want to change the duration of the text track. I'm just going to click and hold down on the edge of this, and I'm going to drag it to 5 seconds to change the duration. Now what I want to do is animate the scale of my text. What I need to do is create an effects track so that I can use keyframes. If we come up here and we click on the Effects tab, the shortcut is Apple E. If you like doing it the long way, you can come up here and click on Track and add New Effect. We can also name our effects tracks. If we double click on the name, I'm going to type Size. Press Return. We come back out. I'm now going to click on the Text tab because I want to adjust the size of my file. This little dot right here, we zoom in and take a closer look. This little purple dot represents our keyframes. I turn this little purple dot on, it will enable my keyframes. Let's zoom back out a little bit. So what we can do is come over here to the text entry window, and I'm just going to type in a value of 20. and by default it will set my last keyframe to the size of the overall text track. If we back this up to the beginning, press the spacebar, okay, you can see that we've adjusted our size. We can also animate other parameters using keyframes. If we turn on the keyframe for tracking, I'm going to max this out, and if we move our playhead to the end of the effects track, I'm going to go back and put a value of 100 in for tracking and turn that keyframe on. So let's back this up. You can see the tracking, animate, and the size. There are also other effects that we can use on our text. If we come over here inside of the media browser and we click on the effects tab here, for example, here's this effect called blown away. If we would like to apply this to our text, we just come down here and click on apply, and it's placing it on the end by default because this is an ending effect. So we'll click here on the timeline and press our spacebar to preview this effect. Okay, you get the idea. Now if I would like to move this effect track to the beginning, if we zoom in and take a closer look, here at the end where I have these etched lines, if I click and hold down, it will move the entire effects track. I'm just going to move this to the beginning. Zoom out. Let's back our playhead up to the beginning, and let's watch here inside of the canvas window. Okay, so you can see that I've moved the effect to the beginning of the track. So you can position this wherever you want. You can also mouse over the edge and then change the duration of the effect by grabbing it. You can move it to the left to compress it or move it to the right to stretch it out. Now we can add multiple effects tracks on here. We don't just have to use blown away. For example, we can go choose a different one. If we click here where it says category, let's go choose glows. And here's a glow apparition. Let's click on apply. And you can see that we've applied that effect. Let's back it at the beginning and let's take a look. I don't know how well you can see that, but there's a little glow that we've applied on there. You will be able to see it much easier when we export the movie. We can also put a background. If we click on textures, we could place a background on here. Let's go choose liquid. Now I don't have any of these effects installed on my hard drive, so it's just going to be represented as a still picture. It's about 4 gigs worth of media, so you can put this stuff on your hard drive and use it. So we'll just choose Candy. If we click on apply to new track, you can see that it's placed that underneath of our text. Okay, so if you want to install those files on there and use those in your projects too. I want to get rid of it, so I'm just going to click on Candy and press the delete key, and it goes away. All right, let's say that I'm happy with my text and I want to export it as a QuickTime video clip with a built-in alpha channel so that I can bring it into my editing program or say After Effects. If I click on File and go to Render Movie, it will pop up a little dialog box here, and I'm just going to type LAP, and I'm just going to click on the desktop to put this on my desktop for now, and I'm going to click Save, and it will export my clip here. And depending on the speed of your machine, if you've got a dual processor with a lot of RAM, it will crank these out pretty fast. I'm just using a laptop, so mine may not be rendering as fast as yours if you have a tower. Okay, so here's the media file that we just created. Let's play this back and take a look at our animated title. Okay, let's look at it one more time. You see the glow effect, the blow away, and you see the size and our tracking. So we've got like 4 things going on there with that title. So of course that file is sitting on the desktop, then you could just go to your editing program and choose File Import and bring it in and drop it on the timeline. That concludes this segment on LiveType. In this Final Cut Pro chapter, I'm going to show you how to create a film look with your DV or analog video footage. Here in my viewer, I have already set an in and an out point on a section of a clip that I would like to create a film look for. I want to show you a really quick way to get this down to the timeline so we can start working on it and create our film look. If I click on this image and drag it over to my canvas and drop it on overwrite, it will place the clip down here on my timeline. However, I don't really want the audio for this particular video clip, so I'm going to go Apple Z to undo that. And what I want to do is come down here to my timeline and I want to untarget A1 and A2. Notice how I broke those 2 off there. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that. I broke those targets off. I don't want any audio to go to that track. However, I do want my video to go to V1. Let's try this again. Now if I click on the video clip and I drag it over to the canvas and I drop it on overwrite, you can see down here the only thing that came to my timeline was video. I want to apply a letterbox filter, or widescreen filter is what Final Cut Pro calls it, to my video clip to give it that film feel, like it was actually shot in 16:9. So let's go do that first before we actually make the clip kind of be all contrasty and film-like. Let's go over here to our Effects tab and click on that. And then we're going to go to Video Filters, and let's scroll down here. I'm using the scroll on my mouse, or you could use this blue bar right here to scroll through the effects. And we want to go to Matte, and let's scroll down, and here is the widescreen filter. So we can apply this widescreen filter to our video clip a couple of ways. I think the easiest way for you to do it in the beginning is just to click and hold on the effect and drag and drop it onto the video clip on the timeline that you want to apply it to. So now I'll let go of the mouse button. And if we look here in our canvas, you can see our letterbox. Well, I actually would like a little more prominent letterbox than that, because if we go turn on our safe area here, show title safe, you can see this letterbox is just on the edge of text safe. And if you want it to show up on an NTSC 4:3 screen monitor, you may have to have this letterbox come out a little bit further. Let's adjust the filter. You can double click on the video clip that's in the timeline, and it opens it here in my viewer. Now you can see where it has cropped the image already, and it's on the checkered background, indicating that alpha channel or that transparency. Let's click on Filters, and here is your widescreen filter. Notice the little check mark means I can turn it on or off. Now the actual type of widescreen filter that we want to use is the 1.85. Now you can see that it comes out a little bit more into our image. Let's zoom in and take a look at that. You can see that it comes outside the text safe, that inside line, a little bit better. Okay, we'll zoom back out. Now let's talk about what we're going to do to create this film look. What we want to do, a little trick that I want to show you, if you hold down your Shift and Option keys at the same time while you have the selection tool, hold down Shift and Option at the same time. Let's drag this video clip up here to V2. We made a copy of it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to right click on this image, and we're going to zoom in now. Now that we have right clicked or control clicked on this image, if you don't have a right click mouse button, you can hold down the control key while clicking and it will give you your contextual menu. We want to go to our composite mode, and we want to apply a multiply composite. By doing this, it makes our image very contrasty. And let's look at our image right here where the blue sky is. And you can see that this image, let's zoom in a little bit, you can see this image is a little too dark. We've lost all detail on the front of the actor. So what we need to do is adjust the opacity of the layer on V2. Adjust the opacity. So if we come down here, you can see here on V2 we have this little line. And this little line here is your opacity levels. And we're going to drop this down to about, we'll start at 8. Now if you don't have this line, what you can do is come down here to the bottom of the timeline, and here is this little block right here. It says Toggle Clip Overlays. I'm going to turn that off, and you can see that my opacity line has disappeared. If we come back down here again and turn it on, you can see that the opacity line has reappeared. So like I said, we're going to start at about a value of 8. Let's come up here to our monitor, and you can see that we are starting to get some of that detail back right there on the edge of that briefcase. Let's zoom back out a little bit, and we're going to scrub through this clip here and give you an idea of what this will look like when the camera actually pans up. Zoom back in. There you go. You can see that we have our detail back again, and we now have somewhat of a film look. We've got another step though that we need to do for those of you that like a little bit of grain. on the bottom right-hand corner of the viewer. If we click on this, you can see that you can generate bars and tone, and we want to render, in our case, a particular type of effect. We can render noise. I'm going to select render noise, and I'm going to zoom back out. And you can see over here in our viewer now we have the static or the snow or the noise, whatever you would like to call it. What we want to do is only add 3 seconds of noise, since this is just a little test. So I'll click there in the time and I will type 300 for 3 seconds. I'll hit return. That gives us our 3 seconds of noise. And now what I'll do is come down here. Let's pull our playhead to the beginning, which will act as our endpoint. And we want to target V3. Let's move our target. Did you guys see that? Moved our target up there to V3. So let's come over here and we'll get our static or noise clip. Let's hold down the mouse, drag and drop it on the canvas. We'll do an overwrite. Let's do overwrite. And if we come down here, you can see that it has added the noise right here on track V3. We're going to crank up the value of our noise here to like a value like 21 to over exaggerate it, so you can see how much grain or noise this puts into your image. So let's come back down here and let's set our grain where we want it at about 8. We'll come up here and look at the image. You can see we have a little bit less grain. Let's scrub through our image here. You can see that we've added now, with these 2 layers here above, somewhat of a film look here onto our video clip. If you don't like as much grain, of course, you can adjust the grain values accordingly. Alright, so we've added our noise to create our grain effect here, but I would like to see a little smoother, softer grains. Let's zoom in here and take a look at this. You can see these grains are a little too hard. Let's add a blur effect to our grains to soften them a little bit. Let's come over here to our browser. We'll make sure that we are under our Effects tab. And what we want to do is we want to go to a folder called Blur. So let's click on this folder, and we'll start out by adding a Gaussian blur. And let's drag and drop this here on the noise. And we'll double click on the noise track. And now what we want to do is click on filters and maybe adjust the blur here. We can see the radius of the blur has a value of 2. Let's try a value of 1. Hit return. Now if we come over here to our clip in the canvas, let's zoom in. You can see that our grains have softened up quite a bit. So we'll zoom back out. Let's scrub our timeline now, so you can see what our clip looks like with the film effect. You could adjust the blur to whatever value you would like, or the noise value, to get your particular style of film look that you are looking for. If you would like to adjust the image even more or mess with it, you might even want to use the color correction tool, which we'll talk about in another chapter.